there, writer rebels. Have you ever considered entering the wonderful world of retellings? Well, I'm here to give you a few pointers on how to turn your favorite story into a story of your very own. Hello there, my name is Scarlett Kol. I'm a young adult author, YouTuber, and storyteller. If this is your first time here, welcome, and if it's not, welcome back. If you are joining us because of Monday's video as part of the Once Upon a Fairy Tale blog tour with S.K. Gregory, then welcome to my channel. I typically do writing advice videos on Thursdays, but I do have the occasional extra video sometimes, like I did this week, where I did the Why I Love to Write Retellings video on Monday. In a, I guess, collaboration with myself, I'm going to do a video today on some pointers on how to write retellings if this is something that you're interested in doing or something that you've been working on. So I do have a little bit of experience writing retellings. I have written a few already. My debut novel was a retelling, which I'll tell you about in a moment, but I also have my Faraway High series, which is a contemporary fantasy retelling series of different stories, and the first book, Falling, is a retelling of The Little Mermaid but with angels, and also Dreamer is the second one in that series, and that's a retelling of Sleeping Beauty. The next one should be coming out in the fall, and I haven't announced that yet, so you'll have to stay tuned to this channel to find out more information on that. Like I said, my debut was also a retelling. It's not in that series, but it was called Mercury Rises, and it is a retelling of Robin Hood in a near future dystopian setting, with a little bit of biopunk in there. So if you are one of those readers out there that's all about the viruses right now, this might be something you might be interested in. And I also had a book bub with this book this week. Yay! So if you've been waiting on that book bub video, I've had to push it a little bit further because I did manage to get a second book bub in like 3 months. So I will want to add that data to my video before I air it. That should be coming to you a little bit closer to the summertime. But anyways, this book is currently on sale until today for 99 cents on all platforms internationally. So if you are interested in a Robin Hood retelling from the point of view of Maid Marian, or you like a little bit of dystopian, or you like a little bit of biopunk, I like to say this is good for fans of the Selection series, crossed with a little bit of Gossip Girl. So if that seems like your jam, you might want to pick that up for 99 cents. The sale typically ends today, but sometimes the pricing takes a little while to come down, especially on Amazon. So if you are watching this on Friday, you might be lucky to snag yourself a copy if you hurry quickly. So that's my sales push for that one. But obviously, this is where I started. I really do enjoy writing retellings. I do write other books that are completely original, or as original as books can be. And but retellings have always been something that I really enjoy writing, and I did a whole video on it, which you can check out in the cards up here. But today we are going to talk about how to write these retellings. So I'm just going to kind of give you some pointers on how to write retellings if you are planning to get into it. Okay, so the first tip that I have for you is to know your source content. A lot of people out there will be like, yeah, I'm going to write this fairy tale retelling, and that's great. I've seen the Disney movie 100 times. That's great. Disney is only one version of that story. It's really important for you to be able to know all of your source content. I'm not saying that you have to spend hours and hours and research every little thing about it, but it is pretty important to at least get a synopsis of the original fairy tales. A lot of the fairy tales, like The Little Mermaid, for instance, have very different endings and very different stories than adjusted or family-friendly versions that have come out from Disney or other networks over the years. So just because you know one version of the story, it's always better to know at least the original version or something a little bit more to that. Why is that important? It's important because when you're developing and shaping your story, you have a better understanding of where that story came from and the themes that it has and what it's trying to tell. The benefit of that is sometimes you can actually find that as inspiration. For instance, The Little Mermaid has a large part of that is about the reason that the Little Mermaid wants to become human is because she won't go to heaven, because mermaids don't go to heaven. They don't have a soul. So there is kind of like this religious element to that story that really isn't present in the Disney version. So when I wrote a Little Mermaid story and decided to use angels instead of mermaids, it kind of actually fits a whole lot better to the original story than it actually does to the Disney version, which I find really interesting. You also might go back and find certain things about different stories. For instance, in this one, Robin Hood, when I was doing research on Robin Hood, one of the things about Robin Hood in some of the other tales, other than the one with the fox, which I do love, there's a lot of stories where Robin Hood dresses up in disguise to trick people or to find out information or something like that. I actually had a decent amount of writer's block with a specific scene. I didn't know what I was going to write. I went back to those original stories, found my research about how he used to disguise and trick himself, and I actually came up with 2 scenes that filled in the rest of the book. It did exactly what I needed it to do, and it's really based on that original story. So knowing where you're coming from is super, super important. Another thing about that too is you don't know what your audience has read and what their source information is. So obviously you are changing up the story, but if you are trying to stay close to the original story, then if you only rely on one source, it's not necessarily going to ring true to everybody, and you may not be pulling the proper threads all the way through your story. For instance, I had an ad once for my Little Mermaid retelling saying it was just as romantic as the original. Well, people were all over me for that because the original story isn't very romantic. It's actually really, really sad. So even though I did know this, I had slipped up and put that in the ad and people were all over it. You don't want to be in the situation where you don't know your source content and that you don't understand how the story works and what people's expectations are. The second recommendation, it kind of goes with this, but not really, is to know your touchstones. So most people remember from Cinderella, there's going to be the glass slipper. For Sleeping Beauty, there's probably going to be somebody sleeping. For Frozen, it's going to be somebody with an icy touch. It could be something thematic, like in Robin Hood, for instance, it's stealing from the rich and giving to the poor, which is more of a theme than an actual object. Or like Cinderella, it could be that glass slipper. People remember certain things about stories and it makes that story alive for them. So when you're trying to write a new story, you need to know what your touchstones are. Whether or not you use them is your choice. So for instance, if we're looking at the glass slipper and you're writing a Cinderella retelling, you have a choice of whether or not you want to have something in the story that represents that glass slipper. If you do, then obviously your audience is going to recognize that this is a Cinderella story. It's going to be a whole lot easier for them to relate to that story. One of the reasons people love retellings is because it's a story they've heard before. They know they like it. They know they enjoy it. They know they kind of have an idea of how it ends, even though you might change it up, but they have a certain idea of the flow of the story. And if you're going to deviate from the flow of that story, that's just fine, but you need to be able to know where people might be turned off of that. Also, if you are deviating from the story, are there certain things that you can throw in there? Like something that represents your glass slipper, that will ground readers into that story and have them realize that, yes, this is a Cinderella retelling, even though I'm going in this totally different direction with this. It kind of gives them that familiarity before you take it all away with whatever it is that you want to do. If you are following very, very close to the original story and that's your intention, then the touchstones are very, very important because you need to make sure that you're hitting them. Otherwise, people are going to think it's something completely different. My third recommendation is to not get sued. Obviously, if you want to write a retelling of Harry Potter, you probably shouldn't do that. That is a hugely copywritten brand and J.K. Rowling will be down your throat faster than you can say Wingardium Leviosa. Copying copywritten material is a very tricky subject. There are some people who can get away with it in terms of spoof, but if you really want to write a legit, meaningful story that's just a retelling of something that is not for public consumption, then you are going to be asking for problems. Granted, maybe you're going to sell 10 copies and nobody's going to care, but My mentality when I go into any project is to assume that you are going to be a superstar, and if you are, what's going to happen? Obviously, if you're going to be selling 500,000 copies and all of a sudden you get a movie deal, hopefully somebody's going to be able to see through that this is copywritten material before that happens, but you're going to get yourself into some trouble. On a smaller note, I also see a lot of people who don't read their source content, so they don't realize some of the stuff that is copywritten that they don't know that it is. For instance, there are a lot of authors out there that will use the Disney versions of names for characters. The Little Mermaid does not have a name. Sleeping Beauty in the Wood does not have a name. Her name is not Aurora. So if you go about calling your Sleeping Beauty Aurora, spelt the same way, you could get yourself into a lot of trouble. Another one that's super common is the character of Gaston. Gaston is a Disney creation. He is not in the original Beauty and the Beast story if you go back to the original content. So there are a lot of authors out there who don't go back to their source. They don't realize that Gaston isn't a character in there, and they will not only use the name, but use the character in their own story. This is not allowed. You may get away with it. Go for it. And if you have, fantastic. You can shoot me a comment and let me know that you're doing just fine. But you are playing with a dangerous, dangerous game here, especially when you're going up against juggernauts like Disney, who could easily squash you like a little teeny bug. There are plenty of people out there who will say there are no new ideas. And doing a retelling, obviously you are intending to retell a story that already exists. So you know it's not a plagiarism thing, it is homage, it is reimagining, it's using a basic outline to create a new story. That's fine. But when you get into things where you're using copywritten material and changing it for your personal benefit, that's not gonna fly. My next tip about writing retellings is more about selling retellings, and that is be careful with your marketing. When you write a retelling, it can be very close or it can be very far away from the source content. Obviously, you're going to know how close or how far away from that content you are. There's a lot of authors that I've seen get into trouble saying that it is a retelling of a particular story, but it doesn't have the particular touchstones that people are expecting, or there's huge deviations from the plot that even though the author may have been inspired by, let's say, Beauty and the Beast, they are so far away from the original story that calling it a retelling of Beauty and the Beast is going to upset their readers because they're going in expecting one thing and this story is nothing like that. Hopefully, you're an engaging author and your readers aren't going to care. But I do see this quite often in terms of reviews and stuff like that, where people are buying a book because they're interested in a particular story or they loved this story growing up. And then you tell them that's what you're giving them, and that's not what it is at all. So you need to be careful when you are marketing these things, whether it is inspired by this or whether it is an actual retelling or it is however you want to word it, but you just need to make sure that you're meeting your reader expectations when you say you're doing a retelling, if you're actually doing a retelling, or if you just really like that story and it inspired you to write something else. And my last recommendation is just to have fun and make it your own. One of the things I said I loved about writing retellings was the fact that it kind of gives you a structure to work with. It gives you characters that you're familiar with. It gives you a world that you love and that you want to return to. So you've got a really happy, joyous starting off point. Have fun with it. Get back into those stories. Remember what it was like being a kid and reading those with your parents or watching those at the movie theater when Disney put them out, or singing the songs if it's a musical that you really, really enjoyed. These can be really, really fun stories to write. They can also come really quickly too, because you do have a bit of a plot structure in place to work with for an outline. So if you've got all of those nice things already set up for you, make it your own. Make it interesting and have the most fun with it, because retellings are a super, super fun genre to write in, and the fans in the retelling world are fantastic. They read very quickly and they tend to love their stories. So if you use any of my pointers to write your retellings. Hopefully you will come up with something that you love and that your fans will love and they will keep coming back for. All right, so that's all I've got for how to write retellings for right now. If you're here because of the Once Upon a Fairy Tale blog tour, welcome. And if you'd like to hear more content from me, please hit that subscribe bar and the notification bell to get notified whenever I have a new video. If you are interested in retellings, Mercury Rises is still 99 cents for just a little while longer if you wanted to pick that up. Otherwise, leave in the comments below what your favorite retelling is, or your favorite retelling author if they write several of them. I will be back next Thursday with another video, and until then, stay safe, stay home, and have a great week.